Cool. All right. Good job. One of the common things that Carrie and I quickly found about both of our work is that, or actually rather our lives, is that you have a long-running interest in whales in your work.
Yes.
My relationship to whales is a bit more personal. My family lives in Bodega Bay, which is the whale watching capital of the world, as proclaimed by that town in Oregon. So I've spent a lot of time observing whales, and you and your work have spent a lot of time researching and thinking about whales. So I think my first question that I'd have is sort of talking about your relationship and.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So my interest in whales precedes my life as an artist, and I decided like 10 years ago to incorporate the research and the reading that I was doing about whales into my work. So to you. And so what I came across while I was researching whales was the relationship between whaling and artificial light, and the way that whale oil was used as a lighting fuel, as an illuminant, and that kind of led the way to like my current interest in infrastructure and the power grid. But whales seem to like keep returning over time. Yeah, and specifically, going back to something we've talked about before, a project that I did 10 years ago was actually about this concept of a whale fall and how like people are interested in it but may never really fully be able to like wrap their heads around it. So a lot of the work has been about like how people try to understand and through different ways.
Yeah.
Whales, the history of whales in relationship to light, something like a whale fall that could last 100 years, but really like we might not ever get there. So
yeah. I don't know, I was really interested, like my favorite thing about the idea of a whale fall is that, you know, it's like, it's at the bottom of the ocean. It's the least friendly place on planet. Like, other than space, bottom of the ocean is like equally as bad.
Yeah.
And then you can have this system all of a sudden just bloom where a whale carcass falls, and where there was just almost nothing, there's springs together like this ecosystem, this system of all these interconnected species working in unison to create this biome that will last for decades. Although I always wonder in the span of like something like a bacteria, or maybe this seems like something that could run for thousands of years, but like
maybe,
that was really interesting to me, because that was sort of the same idea that I had with my video, was this idea of like what do systems look like, and specifically in the video that I was using, like what do these anthropomorphic systems look like extended all the way to the most extreme length, so like equal to like the bottom of the ocean. Like how do these function like a little farm around a dying red dwarf star, and this is the last bit of intelligence left in the universe. It's like these really like caustic environments, like the bottom of the seafloor.
Yeah.
And it's like these things that are like we're not really intended to understand, but we just try to glean these understandings of.
Something else we talked about was like the idea of the invisible and the force, like an unseen force, something you try to imagine, as I was describing, like through all the different tools that you have available, but you actually can't.
Yeah.
And I think about your work in relationship to that as like, there's that unseen, invisible force present, and sometimes it's given form, but mostly you just like sense it being there.
Yeah.
And I think that's through like a lot of different mechanics in your work, through the narrative that you use, but also like everything, all the forms are like kind of abstract, and they actually feel like deep sea forms now that I think about it. Like bacterial, like there's something about them that actually feels like kind of aquatic or deep sea.
Well, it's like this idea of like how do you represent the other when in doing so that very process is anthropomorphizing, like that very process of trying to understand something that is not in any way trying to be understood by you.
Yeah.
It's a very alien process. So I feel like those sort of like morphologies are always kind of similar. It's almost like how we always relate to deep sea life forms as alien looking.
Yeah.
But it makes me think about like with your work, that the piece of like this idea of like the underwater sea cable, is something that has profound effects on like our body and how we function and how we relate every day in really intimate physical means. Like I always like this idea of we haven't talked about this at all, but I was really interested in like phantom leg vibrations.
Oh.
Like, you know, there's like,
Whoa.
I don't know if you ever experienced those where like you get a vibration from your cell phone, but your cell
But
phone's
it
sitting on your
doesn't.
table.
Yeah, totally.
Have you had those?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had those.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's in due part to this just cable running under the ocean that's like incredibly fragile.
Right.
And could be cut at any moment. Maybe it will at some point, but
I don't think that they actually do become cut as much as you think that they would. We talked about that. There was a shark once that found it and tried to actually bite it, and there's a video of this shark. It looks like an oven mitt trying to grab onto the internet cable. It's incredible.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
This is shark.
But I think it's actually really rare, which is amazing because it's just like a garden hose.
Maybe
it's very,
because
very
it's so small. Maybe
Yeah.
because it's so specific in that vast like
Yep.
infinity of nothing that
Yeah.
just there's this one line that
Exactly.
like keeps society running.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's always like, that's so, I wish that, like, I want to know more about this shark.
I know, I do too. A brave, bold, curious shark. You had mentioned something about in relationship to submarine internet cables, which I thought was really beautiful. You had described that like the larger a system is, like the more precarious it is, or like the more fragile it is, which I had never thought about before, and I really appreciated. And I think that that's true in general about like networked systems and infrastructure, like you know, the power grid, for example, like moving behind the internet. We don't have a lot of control over, or maybe zero control over, like the power that we need to actually live at this point. And that's in terms of a safe danger binary or like fragile stable binary, like I think that is quite murky, and I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, me too. Like I feel like it's something that's inherent in like a system becoming more complex, is that we're not by any means designed to be able to comprehend these complex systems. Like they're not a part of our like evolutionary DNA.
Right.
They're something that have been invented like in the past 100 years. So you think about it, like as these things like grow and spread out, we're becoming more and more distant from them, and then by that means like the ability for them to really function for us become less possible. So to our perspective, that seems like more unstable, and that we don't have control over it anymore.
Right.
Yeah, I worry about that. Like I wonder about that all the time. Yeah, I'm curious as to how that's going to change our behavior, or even like our sort of ideas of who we are. I think we were talking about like whether the internet. Oh, that was the question. The whale falls being kind of like
Remind me.
Brought back to whale fall. So like that was our question, was that can. So like a whale fall will eventually run out. Like people like I always wonder about like the bacteria or lobster, like the little squat lobsters that live in these ecosystems.
Yeah.
Like
the ones that feed on the whale fall? The ones
you know, you have like those first stage ones and then the other stage ones, and then by the end it's like these sulfur eating bacteria. It's like you ever wonder those lobsters think to themselves like, it's gonna be like this forever.
So I understand the phases of a whale fall. First it's sharks eating like the outside of the whale, the like skin and the blubber.
Yeah.
Then the lobster and crab. And then when the bones are exposed, there's an organism that only lives on whale falls, and it's called a bone-eating zombie worm.
That's the most. I feel like that's our into talking about horror movies.
Yeah, right, and now horror movies,
Well, it's so geared to that system. It's like the systems, like we're not aware of these systems, but they shape how these organisms eventually function. Like that worm doesn't realize that it's a bone-eating corpse worm. It's just, you know, it's just Gary to himself or whatever. Like he doesn't realize that he's part of this very specific system. You know, that is doomed, that is gonna run out, like that is finite. I think we were talking about like fossil. I think we were talking about fossil fuels too. It's like, is the internet a whale fall bloom? Like is like our ability to like tap in, like all of a sudden we found all that dead dinosaur whale fall in a way, and then like is this run like bloom of civilization that's coming up, and then will eventually dissipate.
I love that question. I don't know. I think that it has to. It's unsustainable.
Right?
It's egotistical for me to even think that I would know, but like, I think as it stands, it's pretty unsustainable. And it's nice to think about life after the internet. Maybe it's all going to be like through our bodies at a certain point. Maybe.
I remember having like this argument with with Luca. We were, I'll say to him like, we realize that like the way we function now isn't even like 15 years ago was completely different.
Yeah.
Like like people worrying about like, you know, just social media and being visually present was just completely not a thing.
Our
like at
attention
all.
span. I don't know, thinking about how to represent like not having consciousness about change, like in this particular film, it makes me think about like a protagonist and not like you're like when I watch that film, I feel sympathetic and I identify with the protagonist, but I also am aware that maybe they don't know. Simon doesn't know what the change, the larger picture is that I know, which.
He's completely oblivious to it. Like, I was really interested in, you know, it's like something we were talking about with like this interest in like cosmic horror, like this kind of like the horror that comes from there being like this existence, this greater system that doesn't care about your thoughts or your intentions. There's no theatricality to it. It's just it is what it is and it has nothing to do with you. So I feel like how we cope with that internally is almost like a security blanket. Like we wrap ourselves in these kind of theatrical dramas, like these melodramas of right and wrong and our importance to one another and our importance to different people and our relationships with these systems and our importance. So the melodrama of like the protagonist of like the singularity and its relationship to the farmer Simon is arbitrary in a way. It means in a way it's supposed to function as an inherent part of the system because we require these dramas to function. Like we need them.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it's like we need to feel like it's important for me to do this thing because I care about it.
Right.
But at the same time, like it's just, you know, you're part of a broader system. But I feel like that's something that, like, going back to your piece, it's like how do we cope with it? How do we visually break down how these systems work and interact? Because it really is kind of like this. I don't know. It's like the minute you try to catch something, it's never specific. Like so, once you catch it, it's kind of like anthropomorphized. It's an art piece. It's something specific to your vision, but you're trying to describe this really broader system. But that always feel like the harder you push at that, like I feel like it gets interesting. That's why I was thinking about your piece. Is like that's what's interesting to me about is that you're trying in this kind of miniature world of order breaking down into larger chaos, like trying to describe something that is incredibly simple in some ways, but also incredibly complex and has like these really profound effects on us.
This idea of like making sense through theatricality or narrative or like the different like sections of a story that might be coexisting around the one you're in. Maybe that connects to like the chair arrangements that I was adding up there to that particular model, because I was thinking about like different ways of cohabitating or working, and whether that's, and thinking about hierarchy specifically within that context, which I think goes back to this idea of the invisible force that, you know, is there, whether it's like instrumental in your particular moment or it's just kind of always there on the sidelines, which is what you were saying. But
I mean, I guess that's like the role of the artist, right? Is to like actually like try to discern and give shape to these sort of like really kind of like cryptic, esoteric type ideas of like these systems that run inherent, like completely alien to like whether you care about them or not, but they shape and guide your life every day. That's something that's like, I feel is like really, it's an interesting topic for.
How did you arrive at that particular color?
I just knew the dominant color was going to be red simply because like the idea is that this small planet with this farm on it and this singularity just orbits this red dwarf star, because red dwarf stars are going to be the last stars in the universe for like the way that the universe will end end theoretically, but it gets to this point where right before it goes to what's called the Dark Ages, where there's nothing, there's no light, like light's completely gone. I know we both talked about light a lot in our work, so it's like there will come this period where it's just red dwarf stars, but it's going to be like this epoch. It's going to be like 5 times longer than the universe is now. Like it's really going to be far more important and relevant to anything that actually happens right now. But space is going to stretch out, so these stars will never be able to interact with one another. They're going to be these islands. I know it's sad. So I just knew that tone, like that red tone, was going to permeate through.
I love that.
Through the piece. So I just kind of kept that as kind of like the palette throughout the thing. A question for you. I'm curious. So you're talking about like the hierarchies in these systems, and I'm really curious as to like how you came to the decision of describing these things as like chaotic, not organized versus chaotic, as like you described like how the arrangement of the chairs and this sort of strange like office structure, like how you came to thinking about that as a way to describe your ideas.
The way that I decided to arrange like the more abstract like infrastructure grid, power grid, and communication grid forms came out of like a place of not knowing and constructing things as I've seen them from like the other side of a fence, or looking at them from like whatever public place I'm in towards the horizon.
Oh, that's
so like
interesting.
I wanted to actually, first of all, it would have been very boring to be like, here's a very accurate model that you could see anywhere else. Like I wanted to make something that was about not understanding and not having access. And so it was, in terms of making, I made things just from memory or from photos, and then I also got kits of like power plants from railroad model kits, but I would throw the instructions away and just use the form. So I wanted it to feel somewhat like both recognizable in terms of like, yes, that vernacular, I understand, I've seen it in the distance, but also kind of like chaotic, as you described.
Yeah.
And then when I was visiting these places, I would think about like, okay, I'm seeing this side, but really like the decision about where I'm standing and where this is and like how this came to be happened in a room somewhere with people sitting around a table. Like that's actually like where a lot of this decision making and a lot of like the adjacent labor comes from. So that like the way that all of those things coexist became.
I am a huge fan of like this subculture, like sci-fi model geekdom with kit bashing.
Whoa.
Okay.
What is this?
So like, it's this term called a nerney or a greeble, and it's like this system of like this like technique of design where you imply complexity by adding like a series of like little boxes or lines in a certain orientation to imply functionality.
Whoa.
And all these sci-fi guys that worked on like Alien and Star Wars and all stuff back in the 70s, they like turned this term kit bashing, where they would take railroad in like engineering kits of like steam model, like all that stuff, and they would just scramble them to the winds and then just basically glue them on to these different forms, like either a cube or for the Borg cube or like the Millennium Falcon or whatever.
I gotta get into that.
The design concept.
Right. Well, in a sculpture,
Yeah.
Like,
I was like, implied complexity is something that I really like as like a design premise.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Implied complexity. I'm gonna use that.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. All right. Good job.